Okay, so since Monster Hunter Rise is coming to console, and I will be playing it with my sister, thank God for Xbox game sharing because I wasn't going to buy it, but it turns out my sister did, so I'll be playing it with her and her friends most likely. And so now that I know I'm going to be going through base Rise again, I wanted to talk about Monster Hunter Rise's progression and what I didn't like about it. Now, I think the main thing that upset me about Rise was the lack of challenge, as I'm sure it was for most people. Apart from the rampages, of course, which were never anything but tedious. It was an interesting idea to be sure, but Rise really didn't need three unique gameplay additions, and luckily Sunbreak decided to focus on the most important one, that being the wire bug. But coming back to progression and its problems, of which there are a few, the most notable being the lack of challenge. Now, for all of low rank, and most if not all of high rank as well, the game is very easy. Now, it's not as though the monsters don't get harder and harder as you progress, because they certainly do, but never to the point of actually halting your progress. And it's mainly because the monsters aren't as fast or aggressive as the player. Now, this would be fine, except for the fact that healing has been changed to provide you with an instant amount whenever you use a potion, and then it slowly starts replenishing your health bar. This change would actually be necessary if the monsters were capable of catching up to the player, but they aren't. Let's say you get hit by a monster and you're low health and want to heal. Well, you've got a few different options. You can 1. Wire fall out of the knockback of the attack, bringing you back to your feet so you can heal instantly. 2. You could go through the knockback animation and start running and then heal instantly. Or 3, get on your dog and run circles around the monster while healing, and the monster, no matter what monster it is, has no chance of stopping you. And even if they do somehow manage to hit you, you've already instantly recovered more health than you've lost. It's really hard to tell which is the biggest contributing factor to the lack of difficulty, but I'm starting to lean more towards healing. Another contributing factor that I think people don't really mention that much is monster tracking. I remember when Rise came out on PC, monster tracking was really strong, and it actually made things somewhat challenging, because you had to be careful of certain moves, especially Kushala Daora's vertical wind laser, because the tracking on it was so strong that even if you were running, it could still hit you, and he could combo that into another wind attack. They reduced the tracking of a lot of these types of moves, though, and it made a lot of monsters' most threatening moves just as easy to avoid as they were on Switch. I personally really liked the strong tracking because it made you have to time your rolls or use the wire bugs to move out of the way. A lot of people found the tracking to be really annoying, which I get, but when you literally have the ability to fly into the air, not to mention the different wire bug evasion moves and also the palamute, I think the monsters being able to snipe you when you aren't paying attention or have good tracking on charges isn't really that big of an issue because you can, just hover in the air above them so they can't hit you. In World, the tracking wasn't as strong because you couldn't move as fast. In Rise, you can literally fly around the monster and change direction instantly after a wire bug dash. So yeah, the tracking should be stronger. Now, Rise's tracking is still stronger than World's, but not strong enough for what it is the player can do. And if it was, the healing system would actually make sense, because you might have to roll immediately after healing to avoid being hit. And if there wasn't an instant healing effect, the game would be too hard, which is crazy to even think about given how easy Rise is. And now you might be thinking, what does this have to do with progression? And the answer is everything, because if there's nothing to stop the player from progressing, they're going to reach the end of the game very quickly, and they aren't going to have a good time, especially since Monster Hunter is built around the idea of fighting monsters to get weapons and armor to fight more powerful monsters. Well, if there is no powerful monsters to warrant you making more powerful weapons and armor, why bother if you can get through the game without it? If, for instance, you were playing Elden Ring, and you started the game with an unupgraded weapon, but that weapon was strong enough to get you through the entire game and made every boss fight easy without upgrading it, would you go out of your way to get upgrade materials to upgrade it? No. Chances are you wouldn't. The only reason you would be because you run up against something that requires you to. And the same is true for Monster Hunter. If you could get through the entirety of low rank or high rank by only making one armor set and weapon for each rank, you would. And the thing is, you can. And so when you have a game that has as many monsters as Rise, and you only need to fight one to make an armor set and weapon that is good enough for the rest of the game because no monster is threatening enough, it's going to feel really easy and boring, even though the game is action-packed and fast-paced. What this ends up meaning is progression in Rise is extremely linear, unlike the other Monster Hunter games, which don't have linear progression because you have monsters capable of halting the player's progress. And so there are peaks and valleys of progression. And so maybe you fight one monster and make its armor and weapon, and that is good enough for maybe 3 or 4 monsters, and then you run into a monster that your weapons and armor aren't strong enough for, even after upgrading them, and so you need to make a new armor set and weapon. Not to mention that this took a lot of time investment to do, which isn't true of the more modern games, which give much more materials and need less for crafting. Now, linear progression isn't a bad thing as long as there's something for you to do at the end, or if the story is entertaining. Now, Base Rise doesn't have a robust endgame for people to engage with, but it does give you the ability to customize your build, and it has 14 different weapons to play around with and make builds for. And for some people, that's good enough, but others want a challenge to overcome and a prize for overcoming it. Base Rise eventually added challenge in the form of Apex Monster event quests, but they gave little incentive for actually doing them, unlike World, which gave us arch-tempered monsters and an armor set to make. Rise's story is there, but it's not good enough to be the main draw of the game. Rise might fail to add actually challenging monsters, but what it does do is give the player more customization of the different weapons. And this is a pretty good form of progression because you need to take on certain quests to unlock these different skills for your weapon, and these are very useful tools in your arsenal. So the progression isn't all bad. I'm not even going to bring up rampages though because they become irrelevant in Sunbreak anyways, but that's all from me.